So Mary, this all began really with your relationship with Jessica. So that began this whole journey.
Yeah, John, it did. So Jessica Buchanan, our, fearless leader, the publisher of our Deserts to Mountaintops and the founder of Soul Speak Press. So she lives in Northern Virginia, as do I. And I met her through a local friend. She came to my sound healing studio in Northern Virginia, and I met her there. And I heard her story, her personal story. First of all, she's a beautiful goddess of a woman, 6 feet tall when you see her, and very grounded. And yet she had this story of her being kidnapped, at gunpoint and a rescue by Navy SEAL Team 6. And so that happened October 25th in 2011. She was just on a routine field mission in Somalia. She loved traveling, particularly to Africa. And she was in Somalia and working as an educational advisor. She was held at gunpoint and held for ransom by a group of Somalian pirates for 93 days. So the backstory is important because she wrote a book at that time, and it was called Impossible Odds. And I would encourage anybody to look into that. It's fantastic. It tells her story. It's incredibly powerful. And there were so many things that happened to her. And she wrote that book right after she was, miraculously rescued. But 10 years later, she decided to write another book. And that's where we come into the picture, because she decided that she wanted to write another book, and she got inside of herself. She's a big meditator, and she looked for inspiration and guidance. And she was given the guidance to not write another book where it was only her voice, but to share all of the other women's voices. And the part of the key piece of that is that when she was the morning of her capture, when she was going on this field mission, she received a message. She didn't feel right. She had this inkling, this kind of knowing. And she tells the story now, 10 years later, she didn't listen to it. And so she wanted to make that, into a story. And so Deserts to Mountaintops was born. And that's where we come in. And the very first volume, the Mystic Chicks are in the very first volume. Its subtitle is called Our Collective Journey to Reclaiming Our Voice. And so that's what she experienced, and that's what she wanted to start. So it's filled with our story and 20 other women's stories of something they've been through, and now they have a story to share with others.
Yeah, I find it interesting because it's kind of like this, to me, a little bit of a paradox. You didn't listen to your intuition, and yet this experience that she went through, which was horrific and traumatizing, obviously, but completely changed her world. So it's kind of like, yes, she didn't listen to her intuition. Maybe there's definitely a lesson there, but then again, she'd be missing out on this whole other journey in her life. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, as would we.
That's a great point, John, because we as healers and energy healers and sound healers, we are also spiritual coaches. And the root of our existence and helping others is to see that everything happens for a reason. And there are layers and layers beyond the physical world of why things happen. And her story is actually very spiritual. I don't want to give away any details, but it's just a great read. And she was protected, and she had a child. She got pregnant right after her rescue. It's really a beautiful story. So I love that you went to that depth right away and got to that root.
Yeah. I mean, things do happen for a reason.
Always.
Yeah, it's for sure.
So then, as part of this, process, it must have been fascinating to kind of delve into your own stories, obviously. And I think that's maybe a major theme that comes through a lot of this, is that everyone sort of has their own story. And I know that that's even a piece of what Jessica does is, this idea, this concept of writing memoirs and things like that. But what was that like going through, Audrey, that journey for you to tell your story?
Well, interesting you should ask, because we got involved with Jessica. I had seen on Instagram she was offering these chapter submissions, and I at the time thought, wow, I would love to write a chapter in a book. I didn't feel like I was ready to write a book at that time, but I thought I can handle a chapter. And so I met with Jessica and then realized, I don't think that that's for me. But during our meeting, she said, I'm open to have the Mystic Chicks write a chapter. So I went back to Mary and Wendy and said, what do you think? Because, three of us sharing obviously be a very condensed story, but we could use the threads of our family trauma and spirituality and overcoming all kinds of things in there.
Well, that was funny because when Audrey sent it, it was probably not even a day went by. And Mary called us and said, oh my God, chicks, I think we should do this because I think I already wrote the chapter. And it was amazing because everything that you're talking about, how is that to dive deep into your own life and, kind of resurrect or transmutate all of your wounding into something positive or a lesson. Excuse me. And Mary's brought her back to age 9.
Oh,
when you had said, I think I just wrote the chapter. It was something that we hadn't talked about or thought about in a very long time.
Yeah, that was the death of my brother Mickey in Vietnam, and that really started a process. In hindsight, so many years later, in the rearview mirror, it's easy to see how it started a process, not just for me, but our family. And of course, we're all family, the Mystic Chicks, with 2 sisters and an aunt, me being the aunt. And so death in our family was something that we went through, and that's a large part of our chapter, and how we then came to a deeper level of spirituality for ourselves. There were 2 brothers that died young in our family. So the family was 6 brothers and 2 girls, 6 boys and 2 girls. I was one of 2 girls, and then my oldest brother John was Audrey and Wendy's dad.
You all, I guess, went to school together, Stacia, so you came in on volume 2 on this. But Stacia, welcome. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
So you have had an incredible journey yourself, traumatic brain injury, and formerly a teacher, having to completely reinvent yourself in so many ways. This has been quite the journey for you.
Yes, it has. Yes. And so you're absolutely correct about the connection here is that we are all Wacona graduates. Wendy and I in particular are in the same graduating class, and we've been friends since we met in middle school. And that friendship has never gone away. So the reason I got involved was because they were heading down to Northern Virginia for their book launch celebration in January of 2023. And my daughter happened to live in Alexandria. So I'd mentioned to Wendy at one point, hey, if you're ever going down to Alexandria, I might jump in the car with you and tag along and get a ride and see my daughter. So they let me know they were going down for this book launch celebration. I'd gotten in the car. Audrey and Wendy were in the front seat. I was packed in the back seat. And we just had about a 6 or 7 hour chat. And in there came, hey, what are you up to, Stacia? And I told them about my work as a brain injury coach and speaker and advocate and educator. And I think it was you, Audrey, who turned around in the seat and said, I think you're supposed to meet Jess Buchanan. She's got her 2nd book in the pipeline, and it's about healing. Mm-hmm. And of course, Deserts to Mountaintops, that name, Jessica found herself in the desert for 93 days as a kidnapping victim. And then a large part of her healing journey occurred when she would hike and reach these mountaintops. And often she hiked with her dad, as I understand it. And so Deserts to Mountaintops became her, the low point and the high point. Mm-hmm. And so the 2nd book that she started to create and to solicit story submissions for was Deserts to Mountaintops Volume 2, Choosing Our Healing Through Radical Self-Acceptance. So fast forward about a month later, Audrey emailed me a link to a Zoom that Jessica was inviting people to jump in on, and I jumped in on it. And her first words to me were, "Who are you?" And she didn't know I was going to appear, and heard a little bit about my story, and she said, "Get on my calendar." And the rest is kind of history.
Yeah.
Her second volume, the premise of that book, Healing Through Radical Self-Acceptance, came because of her relationship with food. She had an eating disorder as a teen, and then found herself in this desert at gunpoint, being starved of food, often given nothing but tuna fish to eat with. The only utensil was a tampon applicator, and was, she kind of had to figure out, well, what about this relationship with food do I have that I would starve myself, and then at gunpoint I'm being starved, and I think I need to heal that. And so she wanted to write the first chapter of her second volume about that, and she did, titled Red Meat. And so these stories were born. And there are stories in volume 2 about eating disorders and surgeries gone wrong, and Lyme disease, and traumatic brain injury, and survivor's guilt, and gender identity, and weight loss surgery. I mean, just all kinds of things. I'm the only traumatic brain injury story in there, but they're all powerful. They're all incredible.
Well, tell me about your story.
Okay. So there we go. My story is, about my journey. I was 12 years ago, I was in a bicycle accident on the Ashewilticook Trail, and I was wearing a helmet. I don't remember my day at work. I don't remember the 10 miles on my bike before I flipped. I don't remember the hours in the ER. My first memory is actually waking up in my own bed next to my husband with a cast on my arm, and waking up and saying, "Hey, why is there a cast on my arm?" And he would say, "Well, you were riding your bike, you fell, you went to the ER, they set it, you're home now." I said, "Hey, why is there a cast on my arm?" I'd say, "Oh, you were bike riding, you fell, you went to the ER, they set it, you're home now." I said, "Hey, why is there a cast on my arm?"
Wow.
And so that kind of tells you the state of my my brain injury. And in the hospital, I did something similar. I asked a battery of about 12 questions over and over and over again. The first 3 being, where are the 3 children? I couldn't remember if they were young, if they were old, if they were living somewhere else independently. I had no idea. So there was that whole acute phase of, I didn't know who I was, where I was. I couldn't read. I couldn't do math anymore. I have a math degree. I was a math teacher for a long time with your wife, where your wife worked, John, and in Pittsfield Public Schools. So it was quite a long journey. I was out of work for about 8 months. I was allowed to go back for about 3 hours a day. And for the last 2 months of school, May and June, the accident occurred the first week of school in September. And then I took the summer off, rested again from those 2 months, working part-time. And Herberg Middle School is only about 2.5, 3 miles from my home, but I'd often have to sit in the car at 10:30 in the morning before I could go back home, just to find the energy to drive those few miles home. And then I'd rest the rest of the day, get up and do it again. And I realized that the neurologist who allowed me to go back to work those last 2 months of school, it was really just an exercise in getting me up and dressed appropriately and to school on time. It wasn't about being productive. Although somehow I pulled off stellar performance reviews for the next 2 years, and worked really hard at home at night after I went home and rested for a while.
Yeah.
And so I lost my career altogether about 2 years later. I just couldn't, my health was going downhill. Around that first year, a lot happened, a lot of changes were occurring. Not only was I home and not working, and I couldn't understand why. I was healing, broken bone and different kinds of bruising on my body. And I got my bell rung, and it felt that way. I was looking at the world differently. My lens was very different. I was noticing all kinds of things all of a sudden, just trying to process everything. But friends and family started to stay away. They didn't know what to do with me. I was very different. I would just space out or run for cover if a loud noise occurred. I stuttered. I couldn't find words. I wasn't sleeping. These are all very common symptoms after a brain injury. So friends and family were staying away. And my kids, and this was all at a time when my kids were empty nesting me too. So that was already feeling different. I was out of work. And then probably the biggest hit was when my husband of almost 3 decades moved out of our home. And I found myself alone and with nothing familiar about my life, including myself. And I really had to figure out how to build that metaphorical ladder and then start climbing one rung at a time to get out of this hole as far as I could rise. And it was a good many years, I would say probably about 4 or 5 years before I really started to round some corners. But being pulled from my job, while it was very painful, it was the beginning of my health being restored.
Mm. Why is that?
It was too much cognitive fatigue. I was pulling off my work. When my principal retired and a new principal came in, my accommodations weren't adhered to. So that was a problem. All of a sudden, I was back in the classroom, which was a no-no on my accommodations. I had been a data coach in the middle school for a couple of years, and that work was very cognitively draining, but I was able to keep up if I did a lot of work at home. But once I was put back in the classroom and then also asked to cover the in-house suspension room, one class period a day, and also be the math coach of the building. It was just like layers and layers. It became too much. And the old me maybe could have handled that, but I couldn't, my brain couldn't keep up.
Mm.
So when I was pulled back from the position, what I understood, what happened was my daily headaches that I'd had a headache for 3 years. That dissipated. I would still get migraine spikes, but that daily headache hum finally went away.
Mm-hmm.
And I could start concentrating on what I needed to do to stay healthy. I didn't have any bandwidth at the end of the workday to concentrate on my own health.
It was almost like the universe was saying, Stacia, you got to take a break.
Yeah.
And one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that happens,
Mm-hmm.
Whether you choose to do it or something bigger makes you choose to do that or makes you do that.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm glad I could figure out what worked for me. I tried different things over time, but I just started to eat differently. I grew some of my own food,
Mm-hmm.
Meditating and getting involved with the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts and starting to do speaking engagements and telling my story. That was really therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
Writing my story, parts of it anyway, for speaking engagements. And then I got involved with this book and writing for that, which would be a little bit more of a bigger project and a more permanent project. I really had to hone in on really what I wanted to say and what message I wanted to say. It's a very condensed version of the whole 12-year journey so far. I think that there's probably more in me to write about, but it's out there.
It's interesting how, and again, we're not neurologists, but when you're lit up and motivated, because I can imagine the sort of doldrums of even if it's just the 3 hours a day going in, and then suddenly kind of turning the corner and saying, wow, this is kind of what I'm here to do. And you kind of find more purpose. And that's that radical transformation, and acceptance, of what it is. I mean, it was a difficult journey, but that's, you were put on earth to do that.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that. It was immensely painful, I will say. I said this last night to Wendy and Mary. I felt like my soul had cracked and everything was different. And I felt very isolated and didn't know what to do with myself. But I have found that, at least right now, serving the brain injury community is where I'm supposed to be. And I know I'm being helpful. I think I am being helpful. I always say, even if there's 700 people in front of me at a conference, if I can just touch one person, I've done my job. So I just keep trying to help with the brain injury community and make a mark that way.
What is this community like, Mary, working with Jessica? There's 4 of you in front of me here today. I assume there's many other, primarily women. I don't know if it's all women. It's all women in this community. Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, that was part of the journey too. Yeah, just the first of all, Jessica, I would say she's a natural coach. You can't help but become friends, I think, with her when you work with her. Her story is so powerful, yet she's so not all about that. She's really about helping others and always looking for new ways to do things, new ways to run her business, new ways to organize, ways to reach other women. And even when we were working with her for our story, I think I had been accustomed over the years of working with either mentors or people who had let's just say a right or a wrong way to do something. So for example, when the chicks, we had written our chapter pretty much. I mean, we were probably 90% complete with it. And there were maybe 3 weeks to go before it was all due. And we completely pivoted. I mean, there just came this moment where we met with Jess and she listened to what we had said. And we were like a little, we're not sure what this. And rather than saying anything right or wrong, she just said to us, maybe that's not your story to tell. Maybe there's a different way or a different story to tell. I mean, that was her gentle approach. And I was scared to death. Wendy and Aud were really good with it and said, oh, that totally frees me up. I can't wait till we go and, pivot and rewrite everything. But that really showed me, it was just this gentle way. And she wasn't worried about it. She didn't then follow up with us and say, hey, how are you doing? Are you meeting your deadline? Are you changing things? She never did that and to my knowledge, with any of the other authors either. And then just hearing all these other women's stories in volume 1. I haven't met all of the women, nor have I read all the stories in volume 2. I've obviously read Stacia's, but not everyone's. Yeah, their stories are just, I mean, it's young women, it's middle-aged women, it's older women. So the gamut of who they are and whether they have children or families or not. It was just amazing working with the women. And the way that Jess had set it up was we read each other's stories throughout the whole process. So we had little teams set up where we would read and just give, sort of kind feedback. There was just kind of let people know.
Everybody has their own style
positives
of feedback. Now, how did you write that? Because there's 3 of you, so that's different than one person writing, obviously. So how did that actually work for the 3 of you to write a piece?
It worked really well. I think we decided on some themes, and I think it was smooth because the very themes that brought us together, and namely the fact that we're family and we have some shared experiences and shared lenses of life, I think it really helped us in writing our chapter. And so what we would do was we would have the theme, and then each of us would have a little vignette, a separate, paragraph or 2 or what have you in that theme. And we kind of went to, what was the desert? How did we get out of it? And then what was the mountaintop? And we each kind of took a role. I think one of the challenging pieces was to find a way to, and this was where we kind of revised completely, I taught English for 18 years, public high school. And as soon as Jess gave us the green light, I was just like, perfect, because now I just, we both just saw how it could all come together, and we didn't need to start where we thought we needed to start, like the right way to start.
I guess that's like my question is, what was the difference between the first one and doing it the second way, which obviously was the way to go? I mean, at least, according to Jessica, and you're obviously feeling that way, but like, what was the difference in the approach?
Well, Jess had said, when was the first time that you guys got together, either to heal or to sing or both? So we started basing it on, there was a fundraiser for Mary's brother, our Uncle Tim, after a horrendous accident. And that was really the first time we publicly got together for that reason. So we started there, and thus quite a bit of the story was about Tim's desert and such. So we decided the time that we spent on our story was a little bit minimal. So that's when Jess had said, you know what, this needs to be about you guys, and go right back, just start where you want to start, which was great, because that just gave us the idea that I'll piggyback on Mary about Jess. What makes her such a beautiful leader too is she just has this grace to let everyone be their authentic selves, because she believes in that herself. And she has this spiritual undertow about her, which of course is how we live our lives. So she recognizes the fact that everything happens as it needs to, as it should, and, gives that liberty and the freedom for us to just move with that as when we needed to pivot, realizing, okay, this is your story and now you're ready to share it. So we just went back very quickly actually and said, oh, it's this. And, it was a definite challenge to weave, first of all, for the brevity. We had so many things to share, which by the way, we are going to write our own book. But starting with the chapter was great. And we looked at family threads and, the root of our work, because we have a spiritual healing business now. So we kind of looked at why did we come together? And, we get asked that question a lot. Were you born this way? Were you born seeing auras, reading energy, knowing things? People, I think, get fascinated that this is our business and they want to know, were you born this way? So we started thinking about that and went back to, that's kind of where we started writing about, because we wanted to write, yes, that we had these inclinations from the time we were young, and they were not honed, they were not accepted, and they were not honored. And we each had to learn that. Among other lessons, we had to learn to overcome that and grow into our authentic selves in this spiritual world that was mainly unseen, unheard, and unexperienced by most. Another challenge of working together and writing the story was like Wendy would love to write by herself because she could think better that way. And I was kind of the pain in the neck little sister that just wanted us to be together all the time. And I loved the creative flow that the three of us would bring. So I loved when we were together, and we edited each other's work in a beautiful way. And what I mean by that is, I remember there were a couple of instances when I would feel frustrated and say, I want to tell the story, but the words aren't quite coming out right. And Wendy and Mary, as two people that knew me quite well, would say, well, I think you mean this, Aud, or you would say this when you were younger. And they would mirror really what I wanted. And then I could write from their perception of me and perception of what I had wanted. So I found that very helpful.
Energy is a big part of your lives. And I find that interesting because, for many, many years, it's been this way for a long time that people haven't really taken that seriously because it's not, you can't see it. But for me, it's everything because it's energy. Energy is everything.
When you were saying energy is an important part of your life, it's like, yes, in agreement with you, John, energy is life. Right? It's scientific, it's physics. Energy is, period. It can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. And so that's what we're working with on every level. And I always like to say in any of our speaking engagements and things like that, to address the idea that it hasn't been socially accepted. And our society has primarily validated and awarded the intellect over the heart. And Audrey has a quote about the heart, but before I turn it over to her, I always like to say, we don't even yet know what it means to be fully human ourselves right here, right now, 2024. We have 2 strands of DNA hooked up, and our scientists want us to call the other 10 junk.
Right.
Of course not. It's so laughable. It's not possible.
Yeah.
It's not possible. So as soon as we kind of surrender to that, relax into that, life becomes so much richer. Because now we're looking around, and the things that might drop in for us, or the things that we just have a knowing to be true, then you're finding, I think nowadays more than ever, you're finding more and more support for that, because we all had those types of stories.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, and maybe it's consistent with this entire conversation, because without that intuition, or without following your heart, a lot of these stories don't happen, or at least you don't get to the mountaintop. Maybe you're going through the desert, but you don't get to the mountaintop without really following your intuition, following your heart, and maybe doing things that conventionally wouldn't necessarily be accepted. Like for Stacia, continuing to be a teacher probably would have been the socially and acceptable thing out there, but at the end of the day, that wasn't right, and you felt it in your heart.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah. And I love that I'm on a different path now, honestly, because I wouldn't have ever been on a different path, reaching for different things and understanding more about human nature and just, you know, I don't know, spiritually, I think I've grown, and relationship wise, I've grown. And I didn't have that opportunity in a fast paced career. And I was very ambitious. And I was probably a year or two away from running my own school. And so I would have been probably doing that until I retired. And I would have retired with, a big party at 65. And I was much younger than that when I retired from that profession and turned a corner. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And, the Mystic Chicks have talked a lot about Jess, and I haven't as much, but she's also a fellow teacher. We've got a lot of teachers here, and this just sitting in front of you, John. I don't know if you know that, but Wendy is a former English teacher, and Mary, music teacher, and I was a former math teacher, and Jess herself was a teacher. And I think she's a lifelong learner like we are. And in addition to that, I think she gets really inspired by her authors. And I think that's why she's such a great writing coach and lead author, because she gets invested in our stories as much as we are invested in hers. And it's a great win-win situation there. And every voice and every writing style in both of these books, and so there's probably about 40 authors between the two volumes, has her own voice and her own style. So it's like reading a mini book and really gaining a lot out of each chapter.
There's a lot to be said for that, because I think in order to choose a career at some point to be a teacher, it takes a certain type of person, and someone also who is willing to take the time to not only tell a story, but to tell it in a certain way. Because what do teachers do? Well, they're teaching, they're showing the way. And so I think that's a really great point, that so much teaching in your history. Of course, everyone's evolved from that being the vocation, because that path is different. But from leaving teaching, but that's still a piece of you.
And I teach energy healing, John, so I kind of got out of the matrix a bit ago. But I just wanted to say our conversations today, the anthologies, they're all testament to the fact that consciousness of humanity is definitely awakening and getting a much higher vibration. I mean, when you look at the world today, most of our clients just can get very down and depressed and say things that are happening are horrible. But we know that the consciousness is evolving, and each person, it's only happening because every person is evolving in some way. And, we're definitely here to hold the energy, hold the light, to support new energy coming in, to support the purging of all the old systems and things that aren't working anymore, for a myriad of reasons, to allow people to choose new pathways, new careers, and to have the strength to say, this is why I'm here. I'm here to see, I see something new. I see past lifetimes, I see your soul mission. I see your soul contracts. And this is why we're here today, to bring all of these beautiful things into the world. And I think, as you mentioned before, there seems to be a little bit more acceptance now. I think it's because people resonate. They might not understand, or they might not consciously be there. But again, it's that we're all born with spirituality and an inner knowing and inner wisdom. And it's sort of this blend of ancient tradition of knowing the truth of things, which isn't always what we see today. And then this new courage and power to bring it in, this excitement and creation and passion to say, wow, I'm here to do these new things. And we see this in everyone, whether you work at a gas station or own a business or you're a teacher, or, everyone's getting these beautiful downloads and insight of, wait, I have this idea to bring all these women together. And I mean, Jess has brought a lot of women together in this short amount of time, and everyone's lives have changed exponentially like ours have. So I just want to say that if any listener is feeling sad or depressed about the world, it's like, then you do what you do to make you happy, because you'll be evolving, and that helps the whole consciousness of the world.
Yeah. And, the way the world is sometimes does not help with people's vibration. It's not exactly, traditional society has not been really set up to have people, raise their vibration. And I think, like you said, the overall is vibration is raising, and so people are starting to really pick up on this, and whether they know it or not consciously.
Yeah, and I have a little story I love to tell about that just happened recently, and we are starting to see some things reflected on the world stage, so to speak. My husband is an attorney, he's trained in reasonable thought. He has a very large heart too. And he reads a lot of newspapers, and he often sends me articles. And he sent me two just this week, one from Wall Street Journal and the other from the New York Times, both with headings that reflect, I think, this new way of thinking. It's not a new way, but maybe reflect that it's more widespread and it's being brought out. And it was that energy healers are the new home repair services. And I paraphrased a little bit, but yeah. And it was like, he sent these to me. I was like, way to go, Raj.
That's great.
He's my barometer of kind of what's happening out on the world stage.
My wife just recently retired, partly because she wants to move on. I think people are seeing some of the old systems, and they're just not accepting it anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I'm so excited for her, by the way. I can tell her I said congrats on that. Yeah. And, brain injury, so I'm going to speak from that angle, it forces you to change course. Many people can't go back to their careers. Many don't ever go back to any, working purpose. And it's really hard. But I know from working with so many survivors and speaking with them at conferences and so forth, that almost all of them have become more grateful and practice meditation. And it's an incredible community of people on a healing journey. Obviously, it's a very slow journey. Minimum 5 years before you kind of sort of feel like you know who you are again. And the healing doesn't stop. I was told, I mentioned this the other day to Wendy and Mary, that when I was 2.5 years out from my injury, I was working with a case manager who said, "Hey, congratulations, you're halfway there." And I said, "Halfway to what?" And he says, "Well, 5 years is kind of like the cap. You can't really recover much after that." And I said, "Oh no, there is no expiration date on my healing."
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't. I'm 12 years out, and I feel like I've healed more in the last couple of years than I have in the last, the first decade. So there is hope out there.
Yeah, that is amazing. And you speak at conferences, and who are the people that are there? What are these conferences? TBI for you is a niche for sure, Stacia. But tell me about that a little bit.
Sure. I have spoken at a number of state brain injury conferences, and the audience is usually made up of a third, probably a little bit more than a third, survivors, caregivers, and clinicians. Sometimes they're heavier in one area, and I might change my talk up a little bit. The conference organizers usually ask me to tell my story with maybe a different theme, maybe going back to work or gaining insight back into your life and how to heal, that type of thing. I've also spoken at a number of schools in the area, Berkshire Medical Center Rehab Center, and BFAIR and Civitan, and so just other organizations on the eastern part of the state. So it just depends sometimes on who's in the audience, and then they may ask me to come in. But most of them have some connection to brain injury or nonprofit of some sort of civic.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, because having worked in healthcare for some time, you hear TBI, and and certainly there's a big range between severe TBI, and perhaps what you experience, which is obviously still very, very difficult, but to see someone functioning the way that you are, having that tag of TBI
Mhm.
on there is inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, John, I'm really lucky. I am high functioning. I had what was classified as a mild to moderate TBI. They used to classify either mild, moderate, or severe. They're doing away with those labels, but at the time I was classified as mild to moderate, and moderate because there was evidence of a slight brain bleed on some imaging. But trust me, even if you have a mild TBI or brain injury, it does not mean it's going to have a mild effect on your life.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is something that people don't understand. Brain injury is everywhere, and it will hit your circle somewhere with someone at some point. And it doesn't always mean it's going to be a traumatic brain injury or,
Yeah.
blunt force to the, outside of your head, but it could be stroke or lack of oxygen or tumor removed, so surgery type of thing. There are a lot of reasons. Infection, Lyme disease can present that way. A lot of autoimmune diseases can. There are so many things that present like brain injury. So the whole brain injury topic is so hot right now, not just because of sports, but because it is everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is, and what's more important, is physically than protecting your brain, and the impacts are so dramatic. Obviously, no one wants to get hurt anywhere,
Right.
but the brain is obviously the most crucial.
Yes, and it's invisible to us. It's not like you're walking around with a cast, right, or a Band-Aid or anything like that. So it's a really hard one for people in your circle to understand, even sometimes medical professionals.
Yeah. And that must have been probably the hardest part, maybe.
It was one of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but wow. And then you spiritual three, you all speak together, or when you do functions, when you do conferences and things like that, are do you come as a group?
We come as a group force.
Package deal.
We are a package deal. Well, here's the thing, John, we did all start our practices of energy medicine individually. So Audrey had a practice, Wendy was practicing, we were all doing the work. I have a studio in Northern Virginia. And in 2020 is when we decided to combine. We just figured, oh my God, with the state of the world and everything that was happening, it was really time to come together, as a group and really just make some changes. We were all at stages of our lives where we could do that, and we wanted to, and be a powerful force of energy healing. So we all each have our specialties. I mean, obviously, I love music. I've always been a musician. I was born on the planet with that gift, really, I guess. I never really thought it was a gift growing up. Everybody in our family kind of did it. I could just sit at a keyboard and hear a song and just play it. I mean, I thought everybody could do that until I got out into the world. I realized maybe that wasn't always the case. And then I've, used that in various ways over the years. I have probably because of all the death in our early family life, I just finished a training to become a death doula. And I use music and sound healing in that way. I sang many years with an international group called the Threshold Singers, and we sing at bedside for people who are at the ultimate threshold. I've always I love that idea. I don't know why. And I think it's just something that I came with, and using music in that healing way. And then I studied for 10 years as a musician under a spiritual teacher and gifted intuitive. And from that role of sitting behind a keyboard and playing the energy of people on stage and what was happening and observing that, I learned such a lot about energy and how it moves to sound, to higher sound, to lower sound, how everything is a vibration, everything is a frequency, every blood, bone, tissue, body part that we have, every emotion, and music and sound can be very instrumental, pardon the pun, thank you, in moving that and changing and helping people, realize that they are their own best healer, and they can heal that root of oftentimes their issues.
we discovered in our early days together that music really helps people integrate whatever healing or release they had experienced. And if you think about that, we know a little bit and we use a little bit, like when they use music to pump up athletes, right?
Sure.
So it's the same type of reapplication in a different way, but music is a way for the body to really integrate. So if you're holding some type of childhood trauma or multidimensional trauma in your body and you've released it, that creates space. And so what happens? Love and light rush in to fill that space when you're in a healing environment. And so that's always people's biggest question. Well, when we're all together, when we're at the retreat, when we're doing the work, we feel great. But then how do we go back to the 9 to 5 and the real life, quote unquote, right? So finding ways to help people integrate and hold that new, higher, raised vibration, no matter what's happening around them, has become really important, especially now when you say, maybe today's world doesn't support it entirely. No, but it happens cellularly, right? Mm-hmm. Each cell is rising up, each human, right? Each human being, their authentic self. That's what reverberates out and gives more people that little tap on the shoulder. You can do it too, and so can you. And so can you.
And your specialty, man.
And my specialty. Well, I guess I love yoga. I'm a movement kind of person. I was always in trees as a little kid. So I like to incorporate that breath and movement. And I also do Akashic record readings. That has kind of become a little niche for me, which I love because it's just a healing. I feel so honored when people come and they share some of their story and feel transformed or feel empowered, really. And that's kind of like when people ask what we do, it can be hard or difficult to explain. But I always kind of come back to this idea that really at the bottom level, we're empowering, we're helping you to empower you because you're your own best guru, best healer, best teacher, best counselor. And so we're providing and facilitating all of this in order to help you do that.
I'll just add, Wendy is a certified yoga trainer. She has done her certification and she is the Akashic record reader at Kripalu at the moment.
Very nice.
Yeah, one of two.
And then for me, Audrey, I was definitely a child that was always reading energy and reading people, but without knowing what it was until Wendy and our dad passed at 23. When I was 23, he died. And I read a lot of books about what happens to the physical body, what happens to the soul, and really found that amazing in-between place of the soul and the energy being constantly alive and vibrant and doing so much without the physical body. So I realized a lot about energy healing. So I guess to say specialty, you place your hands on anything and you can read the energy in it, whether it's the wall, whether it's a person, an animal, a tree. So we do healing of all of that, of land, of homes, of businesses, of people. And for me, probably my favorite session is I love to do a variety of energy healing on people and just reading what happens. And Wendy and I both are certified in reflexology, which is a study of the feet, of all the systems and organs in the body through the feet. So every time now when I get to a client's feet, a lot will come out of the body as I'm grounding them for we'll be able to check in with their guides. We'll see their guides, their past lives, soul contracts, exactly it's like the energy especially the energy that's combined with the three of us is very powerful and can bring, 5 lifetimes out of a person, because I feel like where we are right now too, we don't want to take it 1 + 1 = 2. We're ready to do that combined algebra of let's get a lot of healing. Let's be efficient and get people, past all this trauma. And as you mentioned, John, there are just so many fear systems right now too, which makes it difficult for people to realize they're spiritual. And that's kind of the point of what's going on there, where we're here shedding the light on that, saying you're spiritual, you exist. I say this to clients all the time. We exist in multi dimensions all the time. And that's what we see when we work with them. We can see this lifetime, that, and you're clearing this lesson. And if we see it now in the body, that's like graduation, because that means they've healed those contracts and they're healing those lessons, and all that energy is moving out of the body so they can move forward in their divine selves and with their DNA, active, awaken, and all of these things. So we're totally passionate about that and energy nerds. And we just love, we just love the spiritual, energetic side of everything. And I think energy and spiritual are very similar in terms and in frequency. And we're energetic beings. And when you talked about the medical world, I mean, we mirror for people who they are. Like the medical world can't always tell you who you were and why. The energy always goes to the root of an issue. People might say, something's wrong with my knee. I twisted it 3 years ago, but we're showing what happened when they were 4, because the energy goes right to the root and brings that energy up and out that we can see it. And the person is always validated because the soul only wants validation, right? We just want to know, we want to resonate in truth. And it's like, wow, that's my truth. And while we're just very grateful and honored to be able to read that in people, really our job is to mirror who they are and say, this is you. That's what our guides do. Our guides come in, their guides come in to show them, you have this power, you have this courage, you were this person, you overcame this. So it's just this beautiful juxtaposition of past and present and healing and releasing and taking in and bringing in new energy. So the sessions, so to have all 3 of us with people, especially in groups, Mary focuses a lot on the sound to hold all of this, while Wendy and I are reading the energy and moving the energy and things like that. So I just think it's phenomenal. And I'm just so grateful to have been part of that, grateful to, like every author in these chapter stories, we just want to tell our story to help someone else, to give someone else the courage or awaken something in them that says, wow, I resonate, and maybe I can share who I am to help someone else too. I mean, it's like paying it forward. Angel Bump's now saying that. So it's just beautiful work, I think. And I think people never get tired of hearing stories because it's real, it's truthful, it's authentic, and it's who we are. I mean, the stories, like the ancients always just told stories again and again, generation after generation, to remind people of where they came from and of their power. And this is just very similar, I feel.
It's alchemy, right? It's taking whatever pain you have or your desert that you've endured and flipping it, turning it into the mountaintop. That makes it sound really easy and really fast, and it's not. but it is. It's the base metal of whatever that is for you. And finding that letter, finding the wrongs, finding sometimes the wrong minute by minute each day, but making sure that you are on your path, your sovereign, authentic path.
And finding the people to help us climb, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
My story is no different from any story, your story. That's the beauty of it. Like, we're all energy healers. We're all healing things. We're all in here, to unify who we are at the spiritual level and help raise, the consciousness and bring in the new earth.
And that's you too, John.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you.
I hope so.
You bet.
So thank you so much. It is Deserts to Mountaintops. It's volumes 1, 2, and 3 is coming out soon. Is that
January? She releases them on January 25th. Jess was rescued by SEAL Team 6 on January 25th. And so that's the date she has chosen to release these books. They both, volume 1 in 2023 and volume 2 that I'm involved in 2024, they were released on that day and went best-selling on Amazon that day. And I don't know about yours, but I know mine, like volume 2 is best-selling in 4 different categories. And so, yes, the next one is about motherhood, and it's I'm assuming 2025, January 25th.
So Audrey, Wendy, and Mary, and Stacia, a great pleasure seeing you again, Stacia, and meeting you for the first time. Well, not you. Those junior miss days. I will. So I wish you all the best, and thank you for this conversation. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you.